Hello. I just want to share what I've been experimenting with in terms of running a dual amp setup using TONEX. You don't have to use TONEX. However, I guess more and more people are going to because of the TONEX 1, so small, so affordable, and very good. Now, there are a few little bits of this, so this is not straightforward, but it is important if you're thinking about doing 2 amps. You can see the camera here. We've got a little view down here on the pedal board of what's going on. We've also got another angle here, and I'm doing a screen capture of what's happening in Logic. So what we're doing here, let me just explain the setup. Guitar goes in through tuner wah, through the gig rig loops, the usual deal of the gig rig loops, out of the what says timeline number 9. It's actually going to the Flint, where it splits into 2 and goes into the TONEX. It then goes into a stereo return, and then the where it says Flint number 10, that's actually this delay, which is I'm just experimenting with the Amplitude X time. So it then comes out of the gig rig outputs 1 and 2 into the interface, which is a Focusrite Claret, and we are recording in Logic. Now in Logic, we have channel 1, channel 2. They go to a summing bus. Now on that bus, we have, actually we don't need echo boy, that was from me playing around. We have a gain plugin, and this is where we're going to be flipping into mono and flipping the phase of the TONEXs. So the first thing to note is the big difference between doing 2 amps digitally and 2 amps in the real world with actual amplifiers. In the analog world, phase / polarity, these 2 terms are conflated. The phase, it's either one way or the other. It's either in phase or it's 180 degrees out of phase for the most part with a real amp. With digital stuff, you get latency. Now we all know what latency is that little tiny delay. Now the TONEX has a bit of latency, 1.5 milliseconds approximately. That is marginal, that's tiny, no one would notice that. A millisecond is like a foot. The speed of sound from a foot. So it's like having a speaker here. I explained this in my other video the other day. So 1.5 milliseconds, absolutely nothing. However, with the TONEX, it can vary. So the profile that you choose, it might be 1.5, it might be 1.2, it might be 1.3. With the original TONEX pedal, that latency is more like 2.5 seconds. IK's official figure is 3 milliseconds. It's been measured more recently by Leo Gibson at 2.2. So in that area, but we're going to look at what that difference actually means. So this variable latency can, not necessarily is, but can create a phase shift. Let me show you. So what you heard at the start there, probably. In fact, let's just turn that off. So that's in stereo. So we have the 2 TONEX pedals, one going to the left, one going to the right. Now, if we make that summing bus mono, that's in mono. It's significantly different. Okay, so this is our first really important point. Biamping is vastly different if it's going to different speakers, if each signal is going to a different speaker. If you have 5 milliseconds of delay on one, it's just like that speaker being a bit further away. You will experience it just as like a kind of stereo-ness, it's just like being a bit closer to one than to the other. When you sum those 2 signals, as we're doing here by putting it into mono, they're both coming through simultaneously. There is cancellation that occurs. So if we think of phase, I'm going to try and do a very quick explanation of phase because it's important. So phase, if you think of a sine wave, it goes up, down, up, down, up, down, sounds like this. Out of phase, sorry, reverse polarity will be down, up, down, up, down, up. That will cancel out. So if you have one going up and one going down, and they're doing this like that, they will essentially cancel each other out. In the world of guitar sounds, it's not just a sine wave, it's the whole gamut of frequencies, and the cancellation will be incomplete. So if you have up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and then we have another one, and if we lay it over perfectly like that, that would be in phase. Now, to flip, if the phase is inverted, or it's out of phase, or polarity is inverted, it would be more like this. So then you have a cancellation problem. So that would be the equivalent of hitting the phase button on the G2, or of inverting the phase of one of the channels in Logic. Now, with 2 amps, in that situation, you then just fix the phase issue, broadly speaking. Now, when you have small amounts of latency variation, it's not a flipping or an inverting of polarity, it's a marginal shift. And you get what some people call, well, it's comb filtering. So some frequencies will be cancelling out, some won't be. And it's very interesting to experience this. So let's compare then. So we'll get like a slightly driven sound, or quite a you can hear that's quite sort of stereo-y, should be quite pleasant. You'd 100% need headphones for this video. Let's pop it in mono. Wow, what happened? It's vastly different, isn't it? And so this is the first thing to consider. If you're going to run 2 TONEX and you're going to run them into a PA system, and they're not going to be split into the left speaker and the right speaker, if they're going to be put together, that's what you might be hearing. You'll get that in your headphones, and that will be what the front of house gets. So then while we're in mono now, let's check the phase. Again, like a really big difference. Now we can flip, sorry, I keep saying flip the phase. It's a really bad habit. We can invert the polarity of the right or the left. That'd be the same as putting it on either channel here. It doesn't matter which one we invert. But this is with one inverted. They're different, aren't they? There's quite a substantially different quality to them. And here's a little trick, or a little interesting thing, is if you stick with one for a while and you play, then it sounds strange when you flip it. To me, that change, it sort of became a bit muddy almost. There was like something in the lower or in the mid-range kind of went a bit kind of woofy. That one's a bit more, it's a bit more scooped when we don't flip the phase. We can also flip the phase on the gig rig. Flip the phase, invert the polarity. It's quite drastically different. Now, again, like now, just for the completeness' sake, we're having it in stereo. Invert the phase of one of them. You hear how when we have the signals panned left and right, when we invert the polarity of one of them, the difference is much less than when it's in mono. Oops. So here we go in mono. You may have a really clear preference there, but I can imagine either sound being useful. And if that was just your setup, if that was your normal sound, you'd get used to it and you'd EQ it in the rig or whatever, and you'd probably be all right. You could live with either of them, I would guess. I feel quite uncomfortable with the choice. I feel like, oh, which one is right? I don't know. Now, okay, so next thing is this variable latency that is introduced with digital amp pedals. We can simulate that. So what we're going to do is we're going to be in mono. So let's put so that's the soul food now. It gives quite a complex, harmonically rich sound, so which is a good way of looking at this particular issue. To me, that sounds really wrong. Okay, now then, we have here the sample delay plugin. Now, it's set to milliseconds at the moment, so it's on. Do you hear that? Adding a sub-millisecond delay changes the tonality significantly. So at the moment we're on 0. What I'll do is I'll put in 0.8. I haven't hit return yet though. You hear that? Let's go back the other way. So 0. This is 0.8 milliseconds. So that's less than a millisecond, and you can hear the difference it's making. And it's not the same as inverting the polarity either. So let's pop that in again. So we're going to go from 0.8. So here is nothing is happening here. This is at 0.0 milliseconds sample delay. What we find is there are subtle changes as you add these tiny, tiny imperceivable delays. They're imperceivable when there's one signal, but when there are two and one is shifting ever so slightly, it's just that tiny shift backwards in time. So here we're going to go from 1 to 1.2. 1.2. I haven't hit return yet. You can hear there's a sort of odd quality to it. Getting a kind of a woofy thing. Let's go 1.4. Different again, 1.6. No delay. Now you can see that the latency of the digital amp, and it doesn't matter whether it's TONEX or something different, the latency, even 1 millisecond or sub 1 millisecond, has an impact on the sound when you're combining two of these. So you can live with this if you don't change patches on the amplifier profilers, and everything remains static. The Kemper used to have a way, used to have a setting, and you could set it to fixed latency. This would be useful when people were using 2 or more Kempers, and they correctly identified that when there's variable latency, you have small phase shifts that affect the sound. So there was a setting on the Kemper where you could choose to have the latency set and fixed. It was probably at the maximum possible latency. So you don't get the lowest latency performance, which ordinarily is what you would want. You'd ordinarily want minimal latency. However, when you've got 2 things in parallel, it really matters that that the latency is a static figure. Now, I've spoken to IK. The latest is that they are looking at this. It's not. I don't think this is a design issue particularly, because I think in most cases people will just be using one of these. They'll be using it as an amp, or they'll be using it as a stomp modeler. It's only sickos like me and maybe you who want to run more than one of these in parallel. You might even think about having them on your 2 in parallel as overdrives. I know the guys on that pedal show have done this, where they'll run multiple drives but in parallel, like something mid-rangey, something scoopy, and it sounds great. It's a lovely thing to do. But this phase polarity issue is one that comes up the moment you put things in a parallel signal chain. It's just that when we're working in the digital world, there's an added complexity. It's not just in or out of polarity, it's degrees of outness. Yes, it can sound wrong, it can sound bad, but you put a microphone a foot away from a guitar amp, you're getting it directly from the speaker, and you're getting a bounce off the floor, and you're getting a bounce off the ceiling, on the walls and stuff, all arriving at different times. It is what creates the sound. So, coming back to this, you have the choice of either just living with it. I assume that the latency per profile doesn't change randomly. I assume it is fixed, and it will stay the same per preset. So if your sounds work, then you're in business. However, I think, if IK can figure out how to add in the functionality of fixing the latency on these for those of us that would like that, I think that would be nice. It would be nice to feel confident that the phase issues, that the phase shifts and polarity stuff doesn't move around at all. Just to be really clear about one thing, this is not a TONEX problem. This is not specific to TONEX in any way. So all profiling and modeling amp pedal things, they all have latency. Everything that's digital has latency. In fact, if you look at the numbers that Leo Gibson has done for the Kemper, the Fractal, the Headrush, the Quad Cortex, they all have greater latency than the TONEX 1. The TONEX 1 is about as low as it gets, with that 1.2 to 1.4 milliseconds latency. So you are going to run into this same problem with any of these, combining any of these devices. In fact, you might end up with one pedal that's 3 milliseconds, and one, if you use the Ampero Stomp 2, it's like 10 milliseconds. So then you'll have a 7 millisecond gap. So getting that in phase is very problematic. It's not something that's specific to TONEX. Let's look at some high gain sounds. And that sounds big and juicy here in the room. Sounds fine in mono. Now we've got low end, but it's missing quite a lot of the body. Now it's got the mid-range back, but we lose a bit of the low end. You start to think this is not the one for me, but then if you've got, say you've got 2 full range speakers, or you're going to a PA and it's always going to be in stereo, or you're recording and it's going to be in stereo. Let's do it in stereo. It sounds great. Probably better with the with the polarity inverted. Stereo delay makes it even more interesting. it's quite substantially different, isn't it? I think you'll agree. Now, if you're using the original TONEX, this has higher latency figures than the TONEX 1 by, goodness me, I think about a millisecond. That again, though, is the equivalent of putting this on. So let's pop it in mono. Okay, so this would be giving one of the TONEX 1s the additional latency that the original TONEX pedal has. This phase shift between TONEX 1 and the original TONEX will result in a tonal shift. So what have we learned? We've learned that if you send the guitar signal through the board in stereo, one is going left, one is going right, we know that that will sound good because one speaker is doing one amp sound, the other speaker is doing the other. Any phase, dodgy phase between them just gets interpreted as pleasant stereoness. When we sum them to mono, that's when things become unpredictable, and it's a bit more of a challenging situation. If you're just using two amplifiers and the latency is similar, or it's a phase shift that is agreeable to you, then you can just leave them as they are. It's going to sound the way it sounds. However, if you're looking to really go to town on it, waiting for this update is probably the way to go. Now, it's not, like I say, it's not just the TONEX, it's all digital pedals. Anytime you get digital pedals in parallel, there can be phase variation. So that's something to bear in mind. I hope this has been helpful. I realise it's probably been a bit cork sniffy and a bit daft, but if you've watched this far, please, can I ask you, I keep forgetting to say, drop a subscription on. Would you like and subscribe? It helps the channel grow. If you look at some of the subscriber numbers for the big channels, I'm miles behind. That's fair enough because I'm lazy and I don't do many videos, but do it. Message over. Thanks for watching. Was this helpful? Was it helpful? Are you going to do it, or are you sticking to mono? Just have TONEX running into your delays and make that the stereo bit? Just be mono all the way? Who knows? Not me.